Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to show you how to build a basic React component to deal with pagination. So if you don't know what pagination is, it's basically fetching data from the back end a page at a time. So maybe your results are limited by 3 or by 10 or by 20 blog posts or something like that. And you kind of increment through your pages. So this is what we're going to try to build. We have the pagination limit set to 3, and we can loop through our different pages. And we can click a next button to kind of go to the end or previous to go back to the front. And if we look at the network tab here, I can kind of show you as I click through the pages, it's doing a separate request to an endpoint that's running locally. And this service is connecting to a Mongodb database. So we'll pass in the page number, and that'll get back, a list of 4 results and also tell us how many pages total are in this data set. So if you're interested in learning more about the MERN stack, be sure to follow through this tutorial through the end. All right, so let's just go ahead and start off with a little bit of initial setup. So we're going to build a client and a server that are both hosted in different folders. So I'm going to say make dir client and make dir server. And inside those 2 directories, I'm going to basically do a create React app for the client. So I'm going to go to cd client, npx create React app. And as that's running, I'm going to go ahead and start setting up the server. So let's go into the server folder in another terminal tab, and I'm going to go npm init y. And that's just going to make a package.json that we can start installing some dependencies. And the couple of dependencies we're going to need for this tutorial include Mongoose, which is a library you can use to connect to MongoDB. We're going to use Express, and then we're going to be using a cores library. So I'll go ahead and install those on our server side. And the front end is done setting up the React project. So I'm going to say npm start on our client. And then on the server code, I am going to actually start doing some more setup. So we're going to start with just building out the backend endpoint in the REST API first, because I think it's easier to build a front end when you have a fully built API endpoint. So that's what we're going to do first. I'm going to make a new file called index.js. Okay, so we have index.js, and this is going to be our server file. So here's where we're going to build up our Express service and connect it to our MongoDB database. Now, something I didn't talk about yet is I do have MongoDB already kind of installed on my laptop, and the MongoDB service is running. Just to kind of show you that, if I type in Mongo here, it connects to my Mongo instance, and I can actually show my databases. I can create new ones and stuff like that. But what we're going to do, first of all, is just build a really basic Express API. So since most of this is pretty much boilerplate, I'm kind of going to type through this really quick. So I'm going to set up an Express object and require that from the Express package that we included. I'm also going to bring in Mongoose. So I can require Mongoose here. And then I also want to bring in the cores module, which is going to be needed to set up some middleware so we can connect to it from the front end. So at this point, we can create an app by simply calling the Express function. And then we can actually have it do app.listen down here. And we can listen on port 4000. And this will just pretty much set up our server on port 4000. So some additional setup steps are we're going to use that cores middleware. So I'm going to say app.use, and I'm going to call cores, and I'm also going to say app.use express.json. And that'll pretty much allow us to accept incoming application/JSON content types. Okay, so for right now, we are going to have one endpoint for this tutorial, and that's going to be a GET request that you can do on /post. So I'm just going to go ahead and set that one up. So I'm going to say app.get/posts. That's going to be a callback, which is going to just right now say res.json. Let me actually put rec and res here. And I'll say res.json. I'll do a message that says hello world for right now. And we can come back and make this actually return real data in a second. So at this point, if I were to host this service, so node index.js, we should have an app running on port 4000. So if I go to localhost 4000/posts, we get back some JSON. So our service is running. We have an endpoint we can hit to get back some data. Okay, so now we're going to try to connect our Express service with the MongoDB using Mongoose. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste in some boilerplate code. And this is how you can connect Mongoose to a database. You basically provide a URL. I'm going to use localhost, but you could do a remote URL if you wanted to, and then the name of your database. So I'm going to do pagination for my name. And these are some additional things you kind of have to pass in, or else you might get some warnings due to like deprecations, but that's what we're going to do. And after that, you can actually start setting up your Mongoose schemas, which is kind of what defines the data that you're going to store and retrieve. So let's just go ahead and define what a post is going to look like. So I can go ahead and say const post schema is equal to mongoose.schema and pass it in a definition of what a post should be. So in this case, I'm just going to say text and that could just be a Mongoose string. I'll say string. And then we could also have a title, which could be a string as well. So text and a title. In fact, make sure you do new. I forgot to put new in front of this. And once you define your schema, you can actually pass it into Mongoose to get a post model object back. I'm going to go ahead and say const post is equal to Mongoose model. And I'm going to pass it the string of post and then the post schema. Sorry, lowercase m. So this is for setting up our actual like connection to Mongoose and the setting up our schema that we're going to use when we hit this endpoint. The last step is you kind of have to know when your API is ready and connected to Mongoose. So what I can say is I can get the database connection. So const db is equal to mongoose.connection. And once we have that Mongoose connection, we can kind of add an event listener to know when it's fully connected to the database. So I can say db.once, I can say open, and that's going to invoke a callback function. And once we are open and connected to the database, we can go ahead and put the app listen that we did up here down inside of this open call. So at this point, I should be able to run this and it should connect to my Mongoose instance, but there's no way to really verify it because we're not grabbing anything. So a quick way to verify it is we could just do a little query to get everything. So I'll say const posts is equal to post.find, and that should give me back everything if I give it an empty object. And then I can just go ahead and await that because Mongoose works with promises. So if I'm going to await that, I need to put async in front of my callback. And then what we could do is just return the posts here. So now if I were to save this and refresh the page, we get back a message that says hello world because I forgot to restart my server. All right, so if I refresh that, you'll see over here that we get a collection of a lot of stuff. A lot of it's duplicated because I added that manually, but we could kind of work with this since the data is already set up in my database. But to kind of show you how I did that, you can load up that Mongodb client here. And I can say use the database name, so pagination. So I'll say use pagination. And I can say db.posts. I'm sorry, I think it's called post. And then I can just remove it. So I can clear it out. It might be called post. Let's see. There we go. All right, so now we have no posts. And if I want to insert one manually, I can say db.post.insert. And I can give a title. So I can say like hello world, and I can also give a text. So I'll just put some random text here and make sure I close off that curly brace. And now if I refresh it, I get that data back from my MongoDB database. All right, so the last step of this creating the API endpoint is we need to be able to pass in a page number so that we only get back a particular page. So as an example, if I were to say page 0, I want to get back the first 3 items that we see. So in order to accept that parameter, what we can do is grab that from the request. So I guess a const page is equal to query.page. And since this is going to come in as a string, you're going to have to parse it as an int. So I'll say parse int. And then if someone doesn't define one, I'm just going to go ahead and fall back on page 0. In Mongoose, if you wanted to kind of limit how much data you get back, you can actually call a keyword called limit. I can say limit, and then I can also pass it a integer. So if I only wanted like 3 posts back, I could just say limit 3, and then I'll only get back 3 posts. So let me just go ahead and insert a bunch of fake data. I accidentally just removed it, so I added 5 posts, and you'll see here we get 5 back. But if I refresh my server, like so, we only get back 3. So that is what the limit function does. It basically limits how much data you get back. And then if you wanted to deal with pagination, what happens is you kind of provide a page and there's a page size, right? So for every page, there might be 3 results. So I'm going to say const page size is equal to 3. So instead of limiting it to a hard-coded 3, I'm going to say page size. And then if we were to do page, let's say 1, so instead of page 0, which would be the first 3 items, page 1 would be items 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to say skip, and then page size times the page that we passed in. Okay, so for example, if I were to pass in page of 1, that should skip the first 3 items and give me 3 more. So I'm going to do that. We get back 3 items here. If I do page 2, we get back, oh, I keep forgetting to restart my server. I should use NodeMon to kind of set this up. So page 2 gives us nothing. Page 1 gives us 2 results, and page 0 gives us back 3. Now the last part of this endpoint is we need to kind of tell the user how many total pages there are, right? So one way you can do that with Mongoose is you can do a count documents call. So I can say total is equal to await post.count documents. And that'll give us the back to total. So what I could do instead is just send that back here. So I'll send back posts and total to the user here. Now when I restart my server and hit that endpoint, we know that there are 5 items total and there are 3 posts that come back. And what you actually might want to do is instead of returning 5, I'm going to return how many pages there are. So in this case, there should be 2 pages. So to understand how to get that calculation, you basically take your total and you divide it by your pages and you round up. So instead of doing total of just whatever this is, we are going to say total is math.ceiling. And we can say total divided by page size. All right, so this should give us back 2 now, meaning that there are 2 pages. In fact, I'm going to rename this to total pages, just so it's a little bit more clear. Cool. So that's how we build out the backend. We have an endpoint. We can provide a query string of what page we want. That's going to return us a fixed length of results for every page. And it also tells us how many total pages that we have. And we're going to be using that information to basically know how many buttons to put on the page to know, like, okay, click on button 1, takes you to page 1, etc. So let's go ahead and work on the React part of this. We're going to basically build a component to pull this data in. So I'm going to go to my React app and go to my client folder since we're kind of done with our backend. And I'm just going to be kind of sticking around with this app.js file. We're not going to be dealing with any other files. Let's just go ahead and gut that out and save it. Go ahead and load up my console down here because we're going to be using it. So the first step is we want to basically show, let's say the first page. So to do that in React, what you could do is potentially use a hook called useEffect. And that's going to take a callback function, and the second argument is going to be an empty array for right now. So this is basically when the component mounts, it's going to just do something. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to fetch that data from the backend. And this is complaining because we need to import it. So I'm just going to go ahead and import it from React here. And we can use fetch. If you haven't used the fetch API before, you just basically call fetch. It should be built into your browser. And we could provide it a URL. So in this case, I'm going to say fetch from this URL, hardcode page 0, that should be fine. And that should give us back a result. So I'm going to say response, and then that response object has a function called JSON. So I can say response.json, get back the kind of the JSON array that we're going to be needing. And then secondly, you can tack on another then there to kind of do something with the results. So in this case, I'm going to do some object destructuring to get back the total pages. And I think we also have posts is something that comes back. So I'm going to use those. And for right now, I'm just going to console log them. So I'm going to print out total pages and posts just to verify that when I refresh the page, it does that network request. So down here, we see that we got back 3 results. And we also got back the total pages, which was, where did that print out? 2. And we can also check in the network tab to kind of verify that. Let me just go ahead and pull this out. So you see it did a request, get request to this endpoint, and we got back total pages of 2, and we got back some posts. So the first thing we want to do is we need to kind of render those posts out to the screen. So what I could do is use another hook called useState. And I could just provide it some default state, which would be an empty array. And that's going to kind of hold our posts. So I'm going to say const array of posts and set posts, so that we can kind of store those posts once we get them back from the backend. And then we need to make sure we import this so that it doesn't complain. So when our HTTP request finishes, we could just say set posts, pass it posts, and that will give us, oops, I deleted the T there. That'll give us the ability to kind of render out or map over all those posts. So now in our actual return JSX component, I'm going to go ahead and say posts.map, and we can start rendering them out to the page. So in this case, we just want to show a div, and that div could just be the post.title, and make sure that this actually works. So we get the titles here, and instead of just doing, I'll do maybe an H4 of post.title. And then I'm going to do a paragraph tag of post dot text. Okay, so we want to display the title and the text for every post here. And we could probably add a class name here and call it post and start doing a little bit of styling. I'm going to open up the app CSS file. I'm going to style that post and just give it some, maybe some background color of white. And then the entire app, I think on the index CSS, I could go ahead and give this a background color of like a gray. Let's see how this looks. All right, and we can give this a hard-coded width of like 200, a height of 200. Yeah, that's a little bit too much. Enter it on the page with margin 0 auto, and then give it some box shadow of 0, 2 pixels, 8 pixels, 0. Oh, let's see what this looks like. That's a little much. All right, so we have some posts showing up. It doesn't look exactly like the original demo I gave you, but I think that's close enough. And probably some padding too, so I'll give it a padding of 10. And maybe some margin bottom of 20. Oops, can't type the M for some reason. Not sure what the margin bottom. Oops, I think I need to do this after. Okay, so we have some posts that are showing up, and right now we limited it to 3 posts because that was our hard-coded page size. And what we could do is basically display the page number that we're currently on. So take a breather and think back what we're doing. We need to fetch whatever page that the user wants to view. So in this case, we're hard-coding it to 0, but it would make more sense if this could be dynamic. So let's do another state variable called page number and set page number. And that's going to say use state of 0. So instead of hard-coding this to 0, we can instead do some type of string interpolation here. And I could say page number. So now when the app loads, it's going to be using this state variable to refetch the data. And what we could do is on the use effect, if we, instead of this empty array, if we put the page number here, anytime page number is changed, it's going to go ahead and refetch the new data and populate it on the page. And this, we'll see this work in action when we get the buttons down here. So now that we have an actual page number, let's just go ahead and display a title up at the top. So let's just say here, we could say H2 or H3, we could say page number. And I'll say page number +1, because right now I think it's going to be 0 based index, but we want to add 1 just so it's a little bit cleaner for the user to understand what page they're on. So secondly, what we need to do is add controls down here. So whenever we have, let's say, 2 or 3 pages, we want to show 2 or 3 buttons so that they can change the pages of the application. So after I do the map, I'm going to go ahead and try to list out an X amount of buttons for every page. So in order to figure out how many buttons we need, we could just create a new array that has the number of page number for the elements. So let's say const pages is equal to new array, pass it page number. I could fill it with null and then map it so that I can just put the indexes in here. This is like a little trick that you can kind of use to set up some arrays. So here we have all the pages, and this will have an index, an array of index, I think 0 and 1. So what I want to do is I want to map over those. So I'm going to say pages.map, and then this will be page index, and this could just return a button that has page index +1. So let's see if this renders out what we want, or if we have any errors. I think we have an error, so let's go see what's going on. All right, so sorry, this doesn't need to be page number. This needs to be the total number of pages. So we haven't stored the total pages yet. You see how this is still gray? We should probably store that in a state variable. So I'm going to say const total pages and set total pages equal to use state. And that can also be 0. And when we get results back from the database, we could just go ahead and call set total pages. We could pass it the total pages here. I'm going to rename this as number of pages. So set number of pages. Okay, so instead of doing this whole array stuff here, I'm going to do number of pages. And now if you look over here, we have two buttons that show up. So for page 1 and page 2. So in order to have these function, what you could do is add a click listener to the button. And when you click on page 1 or page 2, we're just going to update this state variable using set page number. So down to the button, I'm going to say on click. And when the user clicks it, you could just say set page number, and then we can say page index. So hopefully that's pretty straightforward. We're just setting the page variable based on whatever they clicked. So now if I were to click on some of these, notice that page of 2 changes, and we're getting different data back. Now it doesn't help that the data I use is all the same. So let me just go ahead and try to connect to Mongo again and insert some more realistic data. So db.posts.insert title of 123 and text of ABC. All right, so now if I refresh, I should get back that on page 2, which I do. And I'll just go ahead and add one more so that we have 3 pages. Okay. So we're getting a warning here because we haven't set the key property when we're doing a map. So what would be useful is on side of this div, we could just say key is equal to post.title, just something unique so it doesn't complain. And then also for the button, we should probably say key is page index. Let's see what this is complaining about. I think it's because we have a bunch with the same title. So what I'm going to do is just do the index here just for now. But in reality, these would all have unique IDs. So what I could do is instead say post of underscore ID, and that's the Mongoose unique ID that was assigned to it. So now we shouldn't see it complain anymore, hopefully. And it looks good. All right, so we're almost done. I just need to add a previous button and a next button. And those are pretty easy to do. Let me just go ahead and minimize this so you can see the code better. So before all the buttons, I'm going to add one called previous. And after these buttons, I'm going to add one called next. And for the previous logic, basically, we can have a function called goToPrevious. And when you call it, it's just going to call set page number of the current page number -1. But we also need to make sure we don't go out of bounds in the negative direction. So I'm going to say math max of 0 and that calculation. So if I were to instead add that click listener to that button, and I go to page 3, notice that when I click previous, it takes me back. The next doesn't work yet, so let's work on that. We could have another function called goToNext. And that is going to be kind of reverse logic where we need to take math.min of the page number +1. And the min needs to be the total pages -1, I believe. Or it's called number of pages -1. Because we don't want to go out of bounds on the right side. So if we're on page 3, or if we're on index 2, we don't want to be able to go to index 3 and go out of bounds. So what I'm going to do is just add another click listener to this. So on click is equal to goToNext. And now I can navigate to the right. I can navigate back to the left. And that is how you can do a very basic pagination in React. Now there's different ways to do pagination or infinite scrolling, but the premise is kind of the same. You're going to have some type of, in Mongoose, you're going to have like a skip and a limit. And on the front end, you're going to have some type of way to keep track of what page you're at and how many results you have and stuff like that. All right, so that wraps up this little tutorial. I went kind of fast and I hope I didn't get you all lost. But if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you have any feedback or suggestions on how I can make these videos better, please be sure to leave me a comment below. And like always, this code is hosted on my GitHub repo, so I'll post that in the description below. All right, have a good day and thanks for watching.